trust is really important. We all, I think, if I were to ask you to put up your hands, everybody would put up their hands in the room in terms of feeling that they're trustworthy and wanting to be trusted. We would all want that. And we know that trust is important as far as the public are concerned, because they're not going to believe what science says unless they trust science. But how do we judge trust? How do we know that we're trustworthy? How do the public know that we're trustworthy? Well, I'm going to sort of move on to that a little bit later on, but let's first of all look at a bit more about why trust is important. And this is from the Ipsos Mori survey that looks every year at how trusted professions are. So doctors come out top. Well, one would hope that they did come out top. We need to trust our doctors. If you're standing in front of your doctor, you want her to be trustworthy, you want her to be telling you the truth. Teachers are trusted, still very trusted. Again, you trust your children with teachers, it's important that they're trusted. But most interestingly, there's been a change in position 2 and 3 between this survey and the last time it was done. Scientists have dropped 4 places in the trust stakes. We're not at the point of falling below hairdressers, but we've gone 4 points down. Does that matter? It's only 4 points after all. Does it matter?
What's the margin of error?
Good question. I think it's within it though. Does it matter? Does it matter that the direction of the travel is in that direction? Well, perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps it isn't a very big figure. But if you think about what else is going on in the world, then there may be logic behind that change in that position. So why is trust so important? Well, it goes without saying that if you as an individual scientist are not trusted, then it's going to be much harder for you individually to have the respect of your peers, to get research funding, to change jobs, to get a better job. We know it matters to people individually that they are trusted, but it also matters for science as a whole, because part of the reason that government funds science is partly on the basis of trust. They expect science to be a real driver of economic growth, but they have to trust that that's what science will do, and they have to trust the science. So the level of trust there is in science feeds directly through or is directly linked to the money that's available for science and in science. The trust is also about whether you can get up out of bed in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror, whether you feel comfortable about what you're doing, and whether you can look at yourself in the mirror as an individual or as a group or as a company. Trust is about making sure that what scientists do is good for humans. And we know that where it goes wrong, scientists can have a huge impact across thousands of people. You've only got to think about some of the products that were so-called proven safe and that are not available on the market anymore. Some of the pesticides that we know have been dangerous, aerosols that we know have been very risky to human health. And then trust is really important for the planet. We know, scientists all know just what a risky place we're in as far as climate change is concerned, that the temperature rises are starting, that unless we get some of the activity that drives climate change to stop, we will all be in a very sticky place. And trust is a really important part of getting that message across. You're not going to get behaviour change in people unless they believe what scientists are saying. And at the moment, we are not at the point where the whole population is yet ready to receive the messages about changes that they need to make in their lifestyles for the planet to be in a better place. I've particularly noticed how different it is when you're working with a body of science compared to my past history working alongside the NHS. So in the NHS, these 2 organisations, the General Medical Council and the Nursing and Midwifery Council, set up are there to protect the public. And what they do is they register and they regulate the medical professions. So doctors, nurses and midwives all have to be registered and are regulated by these 2 bodies. And it's done, particularly the NMC's, its remit is all about public safety. That's the reason that nurses and midwives are registered. With a midwife, you can't practice or call yourself a midwife unless you're registered with the NMC. With the GMC, there are certain activities that you can't do unless you're a registered doctor with the GMC. The NHS takes it extremely seriously. But interestingly, as far as the scientists that are behind the scenes are concerned, there are scientists there that do the groundbreaking work, that create the science, that produce the diagnostic tests and the equipment that are used, that put eventually a piece of paper in front of a doctor, and when she looks at it, she will be able to give a patient a diagnosis from that and create a treatment plan from that. And yet there is no requirement on the scientists behind the scenes doing that work to be individually registered. Some are members of professional bodies, but it's not a requirement. And while some of the science they do is regulated, the scientists themselves are not. So it seems odd to me that you've got this very different approach within one great big employer in the UK. Now, most scientists, as we know, do great stuff and make a fantastic difference for humanity and for the world. We know that the vast majority of science is fabulous, and the vast majority of scientists are extremely careful and ethical in what we do. But there seems to be an increasing highlighting that things do go wrong from time to time, and that not all is as rosy in the garden as we might like. So this is a fairly recent example from The Economist, and there will be various other articles and the odd book written fairly recently about that. So it looks to me like science potentially goes wrong in perhaps 4 different ways. Sometimes the scientists doing the scientists do not have perhaps the skill or the knowledge or even the diligence to do the science well. And I know the Royal Statistical Society has got a bit of a thing about statistics in scientific papers, and their view is that there's probably quite some room for improvement in the number crunching in the papers that are being published at the moment. And if we get it wrong for any of those reasons, then there's a potential devastating effect. So skill, knowledge, and diligence are one place that science sometimes goes wrong. The other place is conflicts of interest, or more often conflicts of loyalty, where perhaps you are employed by an organisation that's got is quoted on the stock market, has got a real push towards profit, and perhaps it's a bit more difficult for you to say no to doing some of the things that you're being asked to do, and you feel that your ethics are being compromised slightly. Science sometimes goes wrong there. And we know that some of the science that's done produces results that were not anticipated when the research was started, and that create negative effects in the world. So sometimes science goes wrong there. And last but not least, occasionally there is a bad penny, and occasionally there is fraud. So these are just some examples. I think probably many of you will have read them in the press, which is Johnson & Johnson is sort of in court, I think, at the moment, over talcum powder being a cause of ovarian cancer. And it's not proven either way yet, but they have, I think, lost their court case. But the most interesting and disturbing thing that came out, a bit like the tobacco companies, is inside that company for decades, there was belief or suspicion or some evidence that there was a link between ovarian cancer and use of talcum powder. And so you have to ask yourself, where were the scientists there? Were they not did they feel alone? Was there no mechanism of supporting them? Were they not working to a code of ethics? How come that Johnson & Johnson, it appears, were able to go on for several decades to the point of a court case for us to find out that probably there is, if the science was properly done, a link between ovarian cancer and talcum powder? That sort of thing, and it hasn't really hit the mainstream press, but that sort of thing, if it does, it starts to undermine trust in science, and it may be linked to that slight fall in places on the trust index. I mean, everybody will have heard of this issue, which is the VW and the emissions scandal. This is affecting tens of thousands of lives. All of us are breathing air that is much more polluted than we thought it should be. We thought we'd solved it. We thought we'd got good emission tests, and no, we hadn't. Now, interestingly, the public view of this has been largely to blame the managers, the heads of the organisation, and nobody's really yet thought to ask the question, where were the scientists in this? Was this tests being done badly? Was this people being put under pressure? What was going on in here with the scientists? Maybe the public will never turn around and ask that question, but it's something we need to be aware of. And if the question was asked, could we as a profession, in all honesty, say that we had everything in place to make sure that scientists weren't in any way complicit in creating this situation? So here's another one here, which is one of those unusual cases of actual fraud. This paper was a paper about infant formula. It was about, it led to the development of hypoallergenic baby formula, and it's now been shown that that was a fraudulent paper. It was nonsense. It spawned an industry creating a product that was unnecessary and probably harmful. The NHS spent thousands of money on it, and years after it was written, the paper's been highlighted as fraudulent and it's been withdrawn. But the scientist is still practicing. He's moved countries and he's still able to practice. And that sort of thing, and again, this one hasn't particularly hit the headlines. The public are not particularly aware of this one. But if they were, it would be there to undermine that trust. Everybody's heard of this one, the Flint water issue. And again, interestingly, the scientists haven't particularly come in the firing line for this one. But it's still out there. So looking a bit more closely at trust, what is it? What is trust all about? There isn't really a particularly good model for it, but here's a version. So trust seems to be made up of two things. One is to do with your conduct, and another element is to do with your competence. And conduct, what's that all about? It's perhaps about you being open, transparent, and very clear, also being honest. A version of that is being authentic and having integrity. It's probably connected as well with working as part of a team, with collaboration, teamwork, and being selfless about things. Sometimes having to be so selfless that you raise an issue which might make your life difficult in raising it. And having an awareness of ethics, an awareness of yourself, and consideration for others. And by others, I mean the wider others, the greater public in what you do, because it may be so fascinating doing the research you do, but you've always got to be keeping an eye on what that might mean when it's used out in the world. And then clearly, in terms of competence, we're talking about your skills and knowing what your skills are, what you can do, what you can't do, what you don't have the training and skills to do, and making sure that you're developing yourself all the time. And in terms of knowledge, both having that deep knowledge of your particular subject, but having enough breadth to have it in context. So there's a lot to trust. It's one little word, but there's an awful lot underlying it. Now, Science Council's role in all of this is to get involved in that and to say, can we help scientists, can we support scientists in being worthy and being seen to be worthy of the public trust, as well as what we do in terms of the individual scientists, giving you a mark that says among your peers you're judged at reaching a certain level, you're carrying out CPD. We know that this kind of registration gives employers the ability to look across the science workforce where there are all sorts of different disciplines and know that if you're a CSci, you're at a certain level. So I think the Science Council has a role to play in supporting you, the individual scientist, in enabling you to become registered as a CSI and making sure that that mark is recognised by employers. But it also has a huge role in making sure the public understand that when scientists are registered, they are held to account. There is a code of conduct. They do CPD. They are members of a professional body, and they have the support of that professional body. So I wanted to talk to you today about registration, and to say that registration of scientists is not about the narrow silo of scientists working in academic research. It's about scientists at all stages in their careers, from those that do a mainly science technician role through to those that might be considered the more traditional scientists. It's also for all sorts of different scientists, not just lab scientists, but people that perhaps are doing more of a communication role or any of the other 10 different roles you might find scientists doing. The registration that the Science Council offers allows you, coming from a variety of different backgrounds at a variety of different levels, to consider registration as a possibility for yourself. And it's our job as the Science Council to become as well known as the GMC and the NMC, so that the public feel assured that if you carry a chartered scientist mark after your name or a registered scientist, that they know that you are a scientist to be trusted, and that the science community as a whole is a trustworthy community because it's willing to put itself out there to be held to account. So underpinning the registration, if you were to register with the Science Council, you have to demonstrate your competence in those areas, you have to commit to carrying out CPD, and you have to be a member of a professional body and abide by your professional body code of conduct. And that's actually a bit different from the way that the GMC and the NMC do it, because they separate membership of a professional body from registration. But actually, I think the link is really good, because it means you get the support of your professional body for the knowledge and education and training and development in your core subject, as well as being part of the Science Council register, which is a cross science register. So I wanted to commend this to you as a way of thinking about your future career. We know it's helpful to you. We know, because I've been to talk to numbers of employers, what they say when they get involved in supporting employees to register, they see people become much more reflective about their career. They think about, what have I done? What am I doing? Where might I go? And it leads them to perhaps down different avenues for training and development, or perhaps into different careers as well. An employer I was talking to recently, the Environment Agency, was saying that when they're doing their promotion boards, they see the scientists that have got RSci or CSci or whatever being much more promotion ready, having thought much more deeply about themselves as scientists and about their career. So we know it's good for the individual scientist. But what I wanted to say today was, as well as being good for each individual in this room, it's good for science as a whole, and it's a good way of us demonstrating to the public that we are trustworthy, and therefore getting their confidence and trust that they can believe us. So if you become registered with the Science Council, there are a variety of professional bodies that you can join to support your individual profession's skill development, and those are just some of them up there on the screen. And I know mobile phones generally aren't allowed in conference rooms, but if you've got your mobile phone now, if you go to the Science Council website with one click, it should take you through to this page. And what we've done, using the wonderful skills of fantastic IT people, is create an online system to support you to register. Registration in the past has been administratively onerous and difficult and involved lots of bits of paper. But what we've done is now put it together so that you can do it online. Getting the registration itself isn't easy. It's a challenging thing to do, but at least the administrative support is a lot easier. So if you click on the orange box and put your email address and a password in there, then behind the scenes we can see that you've registered, and we can support you through that process of helping you think about, well, what competencies have you got and how might you demonstrate them, whether you've got the right levels of qualifications, what you might need to do instead. So behind the scenes, those people will support you to do that. So it makes it administratively much easier to register than ever before, although it's still just as challenging to become a chartered scientist as it ever was. So why might you register? Obviously for the good of the public and for trust in scientists as a whole, but ultimately what registration does, it's independent recognition for you of your achieving and maintaining the exacting standards that you have to reach to join really the global science community as a professional scientist. So I would commend it to you, and I would hope that everybody in this room goes and finds the right bit of the website and fills it in. Or if you want to know more about it, there's a session going on just in the room just behind here, and there are people there from the professional bodies who can help you or who can talk to you about it. It's too important. Trust is too important. If we've dropped 4 points on the scale, that is worrisome. And I think this is part of making sure that we go back and overtake those judges again and get back into third place. So whether you're an individual scientist in the room today, I'd very much like you to prove that you are by registering, or if you're an employer and you'd like some help to support your employees in being registered, then come and talk to us and let's get registered and let's make sure trust stays high in science.